Greetings, creeps, and welcome to Convo Fango. Today we are joined by the authors of Clive Barker's Dark Worlds. We've got Phil and Sarah Stokes, and we are so stoked to have you here today. First time you've heard that, I'm sure.
Very, very good.
No, thank you for asking us, Angel. It's good to be here.
We're really excited to have you guys here. I'm kind of nerding out. I know everyone watching this is nerding out. You two have kind of written like the definitive book about Clive Barker's career so far.
Well, that's kind. I mean, it was a real challenge. When you try and get 40 or 45 years of a creative life between the covers of what was originally a 300-page book. Luckily, the publishers relented and said we could have an extra 50 pages because we had so much to squeeze in. What we've really got, what we hope we've achieved, is a really good overview, an accessible overview. There's so much that we had to decide: how deep do you go? How much do you give a paragraph to? How much do you give 2 pages to? Because Clive's output is so diverse, and there are the things that people know and expect to read. But equally, there's the hidden gems, if you like. There's the bits that are less well known or less well celebrated, but are that we're deeply passionate about, that we wanted to showcase in the book as well. So we hope it's accessible, we hope it's diverse, and we hope it covers a lot of ground.
I imagine this is like in the most extreme version of like Kill Your Darlings, because then do you okay, we know people love Hellraiser, that's like a very familiar title, so then do you do a deep dive on that, or do you do like 2 paragraphs on that and then you do a deep dive on something that we don't really know? Like, which direction do you go with that? Like, how are you making those really difficult decisions?
That was totally our dilemma, and frankly, we were pretty naive about the challenges at the beginning. We thought, yeah, sure, we can do this. Yeah, not a problem. But you're right, and that's why we started with Hellraiser. That's why the book opens with Hellraiser, so that people recognize he's the Hellraiser guy,
right?
But then we want, hopefully, is to say, well, he's the Hellraiser guy, but what else was going on under there? What else can we show you?
I love that. And I think also something that is so challenging about this, I'm just thinking from like purely even just like an editor perspective, like his breadth of work is so massive that I'm like, this is not even just like a filmmaker who has like an insanely long filmography. This is somebody who's also an author, a painter, like an artist across so many different mediums that I'm like, there's so much to cover that I'm just like, what is your blueprint when you're starting out? Like, what is your map for this?
Yeah, and we did map out, and we went, okay, there's clearly, we'll need to cover the films, but let's try and show something that perhaps people are less familiar with about the film. So let's find perhaps some behind the scenes photos that haven't been published widely or not published at all. So we know we've got to do the films. We actually want to do all of the books, because we think the books are a really, really important literary canon, and we wanted to give them fair game through. But the photography that people haven't seen, Clive's been a photographer for 40 years, mostly of the male form, but not exclusively. And of course, his painting, we've already celebrated in a series of 8 books called the Imaginer series. So those are monographs of his oil paintings. We wanted to get all of that in there, but also to put it in context as to, not in terms of biography, but what else was going on at the time. Most of what is in the book is contemporaneous with the subject that we were talking about. So we've gone back to interviews that Clive and others gave at the time a particular movie or a particular book came out, rather than trying to do a retrospective today where people's memories can kind of blur or become a little bit either tainted or rose tinted by what's happened subsequently. So we wanted to present it as it was, and perhaps give a journey as to how a creative life has unfolded. And it's not all been plain sailing. There have been disappointments for Clive along the way, but actually celebrate the successes, analyze what went wrong and places that did go wrong, and how he came back stronger or did something different, or an idea popped up in a different way. So that was both the challenge and actually the joy of putting it together.
I'm so like incredibly intrigued by all of this. And also you had access to his personal archives for this, right? Like you're using like photos of his, art pieces of his. Like, how was that? Like, also that's another thing, like diving into archives. I imagine that wasn't like, oh, here's one folder of things that you can go through. Like
No, we probably come at that from a couple of angles. So there's Clive's own archive. There's also the archive that we've built up from other sources or from collecting things along the way. So it's a combination of everything we could lay hands on. The joy of an archivist is everything's important. No piece of paper is left behind. So we want to see everything, and we want to collate it and tell a story through the archive. An archive can't be a static thing. It needs to breathe and to tell a story, and to shine new light on things, so that people can be inspired, or they can be challenged, or they can just absorb and be entertained. So it's all in there.
Amazing. Another really cool aspect for this, I think personally for me, is this isn't just like if I went to set out and write a book about Clive Barker and I was just researching and doing my best, like you guys have formed a personal relationship with him. He's entrusted you to tell this story. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about like how you met, how your relationship has grown, like how this came to be, I guess?
Yeah, well, like most people who've met Clive, we've met at signings. That was we queued with our books in our hand and said, could you sign this book, please? And thousands upon thousands of people have the experience of talking to Clive in that way, and they almost without fail will say that he's a generous person. He loves to talk about anything that you want to bring to the table. So whether you're coming passionate about his book or another book or film or music, he will love to explore that with you. And so we got to know him first that way, and we'd slowly built maybe the beginnings of the archive online by collecting interviews from Fangoria, Cinefantastiques, that sort of thing, because we were trying to find out more about him. He got to know about the website, and so that's when we first got an interview with him. So we sat down with him in a hotel in London and had basically a really nice long chat over a cup of tea, and that's how it got started.
And how long ago was this?
So that first sit-down interview in London was in 1999.
Okay.
But I guess we'd met him 5 or 6 years before that, when he was touring for initially for Everville and for others. But that 1999 interview was while he was touring with the essential Clive Barker. And the website that we had was and is called Revelations. And out of that, as Sarah says, the archive slowly developed as we got deeper into it. We were looking for themes and finding themes between a book or a short story or a painting and wanting to connect them for ourselves. And as we went on our own journey doing that, we shared things online. And it was a little bit like that movie, if you build it, they will come. It wasn't what we intended to do, but by putting our own personal journey in an exploration of Clive's work online, actually other people would contact us and say, hey, I've been thinking about the same thing, or what I've always really wanted to know is X or Y. Next time you talk to Clive, or is there a way that you could find out the answer to this question? And so it became a really empowering two-way conversation with everybody who wants to know more. And as Sarah says, Clive's very generous, and he was very happy to give interviews or to allow us to share information with people in that way. And it's slowly built over time.
This is definitely your field of dreams. Yeah. But
yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting, the website aspect, because I feel like, again, when you're starting with so much, like it's really hard sometimes. I think that's like making a documentary, this is just the written version of that. You're starting with so much material, and you kind of have to chisel away before like what exactly is the story here. So I feel like that kind of back and forth kind of allowed you to kind of really hone it down and be like, okay, what do you guys want to know? And then we'll find that out and tell you.
Yeah, and I suspect if Dark Worlds works, it works because we've been kind of writing it in our heads for 25 years. So it's the current state of our thinking about Clive and his work. And you were right at the beginning to say, where he is today, because of course he's still creating furiously, and part of the difficulty of knowing where to stop in something like Dark Worlds is knowing how much to talk about the things that we know are coming next, as compared to a hard close to say, this is the public face of everything that's happened so far. So there's lots more still to come.
What is the most recent project that you guys talk about in Dark Worlds?
So we probably finish up to. That's a good question. Shall we go to the
books? Can I crib?
So we certainly have some sections in there that point towards some current preoccupations that Clive has. One is around sharing much more of his photography, and one is about sharing his poetry.
Yeah.
And the poetry collection that he's scheduled for next year at some point, I think will be another aspect that perhaps people haven't realized quite how much poetry Clive has written from a very young age. I mean, there's poetry scattered around the novels. There's poetry scattered certainly throughout the Abrams books, but he writes poetry constantly, and often as a distraction from long form prose, or a way to get the imagination working. So the poetry, when it's collected, is a phenomenal collection, and as I say, that should be out next year.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm excited for that. Did you guys, there's a ton of people that have contributed to this book in different interviews, and like icons. Like, we're talking about an icon, so I feel like, who do you get to talk about an icon? It's got to be other icons. So you've got incredible interviews in here. Did you conduct new interviews for this, or is it all archive stuff, or is it a mix?
It's a mix, mostly archive. Again, we wanted to be contemporaneous and in the moment, and actually to celebrate the people who have been part of Clive's journey. So either people who he has been mentored by, or peers that he's interacted with. So we thought it was important when we went to a Wes Craven or a Peter Straub or a Neil Gaiman quote that they were in the moment and they were talking about the project that we were talking about at the same time. Again, not wanting to do it as a retrospective. So the great thing is Clive has always been very generous with his praise of others, but we wanted to capture just some comments that other people have made about him. And I think they bring the book to life.
Yeah, that was an exciting part for me when I was reading the description of this book and some of the names that you have included for these. I was like, this is going to be, it's just such an interesting thing to get to read about an artist through the perspective of other artists and other creators, and of that caliber, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, absolutely. And no artist comes through on their own. They always are reflecting other artists around them, other work around them. And so it felt very natural to say, he's not a singular mind traveling and producing all this creative work. He's constantly bouncing off both contemporary people and his loves of art of the past. And so, his knowledge is phenomenal in terms of art and novels. And you can start talking about almost anybody. You start talking about playwrights, Webster, he'll go off on a whole tangent about it. So he's clearly, I think he shows a lot of the breadth of his knowledge in the breadth of his own creative output.
Yeah. Absolutely. So for example, recently we were talking about sources of inspiration for a couple of chapters within Weave World, his novel, and we ranged all the way through from Irish poetry through to English poetry, through to the works of Richard Dadd, the artist, and into geography and a love of nature, all in the spread of, 2 or 3 minutes. So nailing down where the influences come and how they bubble up in an idea that then becomes accessible through his work is it's every time you scratch, there's a really, really deep amount of thought and influence that's gone behind it.
This is, I think, just going to be such a cool read for not only like hardcore Clive Barker fans, anyone who's even just like a casual fan or a casual fan of just art in general, because this is somebody who has such an intense understanding of art across like multiple mediums that I'm like, there's no way that you could, as a fan of any sort of art, read this and not come away with like just feeling inspired or being like, oh, I have all these new things to go and learn about.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. And even for anyone who doesn't want to read it, if you turn the pages, we've tried to make it as visual as possible as well. And
she's pretty, yeah.
The joy of having a writer who is also a painter and an illustrator and a photographer means that there's, you can bring an idea to life in several different ways. And so hopefully it's a visual treat for anybody who doesn't want to read what we wrote.
So what you're saying is it works as a picture book as well.
It's for all ages, Angel. All ages.
We've got something for everybody. It's the perfect holiday gift. If you don't like words, bam, look at these beautiful images.
You got it.
There you go.
What was the most enjoyable part of it? I can tell that you guys just seemed like you just had so much fun putting this together, but what was the most enjoyable part of this for you?
Finishing it.
Okay, that's a good answer. That's fair.
No, I think the joy actually. We've published several books through the archive ourselves, which have been deep dives into various aspects of Clive's work. I actually really enjoyed working with our editor Rodolphe at Sununnos, and the way that Abrams decided to lay the book out. So I would never have come up with the idea of, for example, putting the double-page spread about Candyman onto a honey-coloured double spread of pages, or putting the Scarlet Gospels onto, blood red pages. Mm-hmm. So as you turn, it's not just black and white text and photographs on white paper. Actually, the thought that's gone into the design of this book, I really enjoyed working with somebody who was visually literate and could actually complement and enhance the works that we were putting together. I think it's a beautifully designed book, and that is definitely down to the team at Sununnos.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. And what I found interesting about that was that they were picking different images to the ones that we were thinking should be highlighted. And they say, yeah, well, have a look at this one. We think this works really well. And with having those additional eyes on it, giving fresh perspective, totally made it a far better book than we could ever make on our own.
I love that you guys pointed that out, because I feel like the layout and the design of something is so often kind of overlooked, or like a thankless kind of thing. Like we see it and we appreciate it, but we don't think like, oh, someone had to lay this out. You know what I mean? Like I think about that when I look at like Fango issues, and I'm like, oh, Jason is our creative director. Like he made it beautiful, but I don't necessarily know that people think about the person behind that. So I really love that that's what you guys shouted out.
It was great.
No question.
Also, what's it like then to hold that in your hands? Because you spent, or how long did you spend on this? How many years have you been working on this particular book?
So let's see.
Well,
and as we hold it in our hands, we should.
Oh, yes, there you go.
I guess about 18 months, beginning to end. Probably about 12 months of proper writing.
Yeah.
That is actually very, very fast. I thought your guys going to be like, it was 75 years or something, even though you only looked 20.
I think maybe it was a fraction longer if you actually add in all the legals at the beginning and all of that stuff.
I think what Sarah means, if you add in all the prevarication I had with the, I don't quite know how to structure this book.
We did have a couple of goes.
It's one of those things where it's like, it's probably a hard question to answer, because this has been like, how many years have you been fans of Clive and collecting these things and learning these things, which you couldn't have written that book without all of that. That's kind of like the research portion, but you were just doing that naturally, along with all the other books that you've done and pieces that you've put together. So
yeah, and I guess that's right, drawing on 20 years of conversations, not just with Clive, but with those who've collaborated with Clive, whether it's other people from the movies or other authors or the people we interact with through the website. All of that informs how we think about a topic. So you're right, it's I say 18 months, it's probably 20 years.
18 months to write this and put it together, but it's been, a lifelong journey of like laying the groundwork for this to be what it is. So how does it feel then to hold that in your hand and flip through the pages looking gorgeous and beautiful after you've spent 18 months, like words and images and, just kind of everywhere? And now it's this. It's boring.
It's always so totally different to looking at PDFs and to actually hold it in your hand. It was a delight, totally. And again, that goes back to the whole publishing, all the team at Sununnos. It was. I think as Phil says, we were glad we'd finished it. What's next?
I would say my first thought when I held it was, that's a lot heavier than I thought it was going to be. It's a substantial book. It's been beautifully produced. and perhaps the greatest thing is that Clive got his copy, and we talked about it, and we turned pages together, and there were things in there he'd forgotten. There were visual treats that he turned the page with us, and he of course had seen it like we had as PDFs all the way through, but there really is nothing like turning the pages and being surprised by the thing that comes next.
Yes, I love that. It just makes it real. I mean, I know it's still real when it exists as a PDF, but like I can make a PDF. I can't print a book through Abrams. You know what I mean? Or I have not done that. So it's a different feel when you're holding it, or you like come across it in a bookstore and you're like, oh my goodness, that's ours. Like
that's right.
That's really cool.
Seeing it in the wild is a different experience.
Definitely.
So how much did Clive collaborate on this with you throughout the like 18-month process?
Well, so obviously he was our first port of call. So it was Clive, someone's got this idea, what do you think? And he, as always, is incredibly generous in sharing not just his time, but his permission to go after something the way we wanted to go for it. I mean, as Phil said, we've built up a relationship over a long period now, and hopefully that's made him comfortable that we would address it with the same sort of passion he knows we've got for his work, as he carries as an artist his passion for his creativity. And so he said, go to it, basically. And so that's when we turned around and started going, right, what are we going to put in it? So he didn't interrupt in that sense. He let us have a go at it first, and then as soon as we started bringing back ideas, visual ideas in particular, he was very engaged then, and excited. And well, you've got this photograph, but what about this one? I've got something else. And so we always love working with him. He always comes up with things out of left field that we wouldn't have thought of. So
I don't think we've told anyone this. So the title is Clive's title.
Yes.
So we were throwing around ideas as to what to call the book, and Clive Barker's Dark World sounded like an interesting introduction or a calling card, but then to use the book almost as a juxtaposition. If you open the book, it's not full of dark worlds. It starts with a dark world in Hellraiser, and clearly the horror side of things is a very, very important theme that runs through the book. But the brightness and the vividness of some of the Aberrac canvases, or of the photography, Clive has a series of photographs called Imagining Man, which he'll body paint people in very bright colours to evoke a theme. You put all that really bright stuff in a book called Dark Worlds, which has got this lovely black and white cover, and just making sure that entry point of Dark Worlds to actually show, there's a lot of diversity in these dark worlds, and while there might be a dark theme that runs through the whole thing, look at some of the brightness as well, because you can't have the dark without the light.
I love that. That's great. What is your, I don't know if this might be a crappy question, but what is your favorite Clive Barker creation? Yeah, I said it might be a crappy question. It's not. That's
no, it's a great question. It's just
I mean, it's a ratty question because it's like, oh, don't make me choose. Like, yeah.
I mean, some of the things that we love, and I think honestly the answer is it's a different answer on every day. But we love Chiliad, which is a novella which isn't widely read, but is one of the most deeply felt pieces of writing that we've known him write. That's incredibly moving. In terms of visuals, I mean, we have an awful lot of people now are saying, hey, we should have more Clive Barker on in film, in TV. Look at all the wondrous talent that can now be brought to imagined worlds. And so I think we're very excited about what the future holds in terms of an awful lot of his works.
So my favourite novel would be The Great and Secret Show, because I think it hints at an enormous possibility in terms of storytelling in exactly the same way that the first Hellraiser movie did. You didn't understand what was going on in Hellraiser, and so people were able to develop themes and a mythos around it. I love The Great and Secret Show for that, but I would echo Chiliad is a great novella, very personal, a very sometimes brutal, sometimes very meditative reflection on what it is to be human. And I think it hints at some really major concerns of Clive's around the environment and our care for animals in the way that he elaborates in a story like Sacrament, which again, as Sarah says, I think some of these things are ripe for television and film because the technology has caught up with some of the visuals that are within the books.
Right. I love that this is going to, I think in a lot of ways, or my hope for this is that it's going to serve as kind of a gateway. Like Hellraiser is the gateway to Clive Barker. And now you guys are going to be like, and look what else, look at all this amazing stuff there is to choose from and to kind of get into it because there is literally so much. So I'm kind of like, my hope is that this serves as like a little primer for people to like get deeper into the dark and not so dark worlds.
Yeah, and that is, and we know Clive's already using it in that way as well. So both the Imaginer art books and Dark Worlds are an ability for him to say, "Look, I've told you all along that I do lots of different things." So I'm very happy to take this meeting with you about a particular project. But have you also thought about this one? And actually being able to show some visuals and some breadth, I think is surprising some people who have narrow niche views of artists as to what they can and should be contributing.
Yes. And now he can open up to page 30 and he just like taps the thing. Amazing. Is there anything else you guys would like to share with us about the book before we go?
Just to say, it's been a joy to write. It's just as much of a joy to see it in somebody else's hands, and for us to take the questions about, well, why did you leave this out? This is my favorite bit. So there will be more to come, but because it's our own adventure, and so we're just very, very happy that we can share it with you and with others.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And there's going to be a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 13, I'm sure.
We'll let you know for sure.
Yes, but why did you leave this out is inevitable. You could list 500 things and somebody's going to say, why did you leave this out? It's just part of it, I guess.
And the most interesting thing will be what comes next from Clive.
Yes. I'm very excited. Also, I feel like you guys know a lot about what that's going to be because you have these very mischievous faces when you talk about it. So I'm very excited to see what Clive has in store for us, because judging from your expressions, there's some cool stuff on the horizon.
Always.
Guaranteed.
All right, thank you guys so much, everyone. Clive Barker's Dark Worlds is now available. Makes a great holiday gift, just saying. Get out there, get it. All right. And thank you guys so much.